Welcome to Congregation Lador Vador. I am Rabbi Steven Moskowitz, and I have the privilege of serving this congregation. Our adult education offerings are wide and varied. We have conversations with senators and authors and concerts with talented musicians. We hope that these conversations and concerts bring meaning to our community. Mark your calendars for my next conversation with Superintendent Ianni of Oyster Bay Schools on the state of education. Will be held on Wednesday, January 25th at 7 p.m., and a concert with Broadway stars on Saturday, January 21st at 7:30 p.m. Join me for my ongoing class on the Bible on Mondays, January 9th at 7 p.m. on Zoom. And of course, this Friday evening and every Friday evening, join us for Shabbat services. And this Friday especially, our congregation's very own band will add spirit to our Shabbat celebration. This evening, I am joined by my friend Marc Greenberg, the executive director and co-founder of the Interfaith Assembly on Homelessness and Housing. And since 1985, the Assembly has advocated for public policies that will produce affordable housing, prevent homelessness, provide needed emergency and social services, and promote income for those who are homeless and at risk of homelessness. In 1989, while continuing and expanding its advocacy efforts, the Assembly helped create a life skills program to help those who have experienced homelessness to recover from their traumas and rebuild their lives. In fact, every year my seventh graders learn from a graduate of this program. Marc encourages New York's faith communities to maximize their impact on addressing the crisis of homelessness and the shortage of affordable housing. These efforts include working closely with the Mayor's Center for Faith-Based and Community Partnerships and the establishment of a code of compassionate conduct for organizations, including government agencies, who serve those who are homeless, and the engagement of faith leaders and their communities to live out their values in the way they view the other and encourage the development of transitional and permanent affordable housing in every New York City neighborhood. So please join me in welcoming our guest, Marc Greenberg, to our synagogue.
Thank you. Thank you.
Our topic for this evening is what can we do about homelessness, and what are our responsibilities to those living on our city's streets? And of course, given that we are a synagogue, what does Judaism have to offer us about these problems and this crisis? But before I turn to those questions, I wanted everyone to meet Marc and hear your story. So Marc, let's begin with your story. I mean, how did you get into this, and why are you doing what you do?
Well, you know, we've spoken about this before, and I told you about my beginning in meeting with the leader at that point of the Cathedral St. John the Divine, the dean and the bishop. But I think there are some earlier parts of my life, some experiences that somehow sensitized me to those who are being left out. I had some personal experiences that kind of opened up my heart, and I think that's what made me more sensitive to this population. It kind of prepared me for the later experiences, but as I mentioned to you, I had helped my father start a family business, worked with it for 10 years, thought it was time to move on, and looked for things that I could do, and then found my way up to the Cathedral St. John the Divine and attended an event on ecology, spirituality, and community. Was very inspired by the community that I met there, met the dean of the cathedral, Jim Morton, and met the bishop, the Episcopal Bishop of New York, and in that started to learn about this whole network of religious communities and religious leaders who were really very committed to social justice. Now, I had been bar mitzvahed, but I had never connected with my community in that way. And here I found this entire world that I just saw had tremendous potential, and I found very inspiring. So my first work at the cathedral had to do with hunger. We helped organize a day. Initially, we were going to have a conference about what can we do about hunger. And then as my co-planner and I were planning this, we said to ourselves, you know, we're going to have a day talking about hunger. We're not going to be feeding a single person. That's kind of absurd, right?
Yeah.
So we decided, this was the day before Thanksgiving in 1982, we decided that we would have a food program. We'd have what we called our Thanksgiving Food Forum. And so we then got all these volunteers and got all these turkeys donated. As I was saying, we stored these frozen turkeys in the basement of Nathan's. And we had a lot of food prepared, but only a few people, and we had the whole program planned, but downstairs we had all this food prepared, and very few people were coming in, and some volunteers said, I know where hungry people are. We didn't know how to reach out to them. They put some flyers together, they went to Harlem, they went to the Bronx. Before you knew it, we served 1,100 meals that day. And so
the point, you had to go to the people, as opposed to opening like your doors in a sense.
Right, they didn't know that there'd be food there that day. They weren't in the habit, but these volunteers knew where the hungry people were, and they just started piling in. So when I had, the program was going very well upstairs, and I decided to take a break, I went downstairs to have some lunch. We actually had asked a harpist to play for lunch, which was an amazing idea. Someone who had studied with Harpo Marx's teacher, believe it or not. And so he's playing harp, and I'm eating this food, and I'm looking around and seeing all these people who are hungry, and I just started to cry. I had never experienced the reality of hunger in my life. I grew up in Plainview. There's no hungry people that I knew of. I had never been hungry, and I never knew hungry people, and it just got into my skin. There's such need out there. And I'm so fortunate that I never felt it, but I am also in a position to do something about it. And that kind of got me started in saying, what can I do about dealing with poverty? And can I look at this whole network of faith leaders, and maybe I can help them to be more effective? And that was kind of how I saw our mission. And then about a year later, about a year later, I'm not sure, I saw the film Gandhi, very inspired by it, walked out, stepped over a homeless person coming out of the film. A few blocks later, there was another homeless person sleeping on the steps of a church. And I was saying, why is this person not sleeping in the church? What's going on here? And scheduled to speak that Sunday was Robert Hayes, who had just founded the Coalition for the Homeless. So I went that Sunday to St. James Episcopal Church and spoke to Bob Hayes and said, listen, I'm working with the bishop and the dean, what can we do? And he said, well, can you ask the bishop to write an op-ed piece in the New York Times calling on the city to build more housing for the homeless? So I went to the bishop and I said, can you do this? And he said, Mark, they only let me write one op-ed piece every 6 months. I've written one recently, but let's do a press conference. So the day before Christmas, Christmas Eve day, he called his friends together. We had bishops, we had rabbis, Mark Tannenbaum was there, I think Balfour Brickner was there. I don't think Marshall Meyer was in town yet.
He wasn't there yet.
And then we had some imams and called on the city to build more housing for the homeless. And that was really how my involvement with homelessness started. And we had a whole series of conversations with the mayor's office. I think it was Mark Tannenbaum. Balfour Brickner had a connection with Ed Koch's administration, so we met with them for 9 months. And that was really how I got started. It just...
Can you talk, I mean, you were struck by the hunger that you saw, but yet you started working about homelessness, so you got to unpack that a little bit more.
But you know, my point, and as I was saying earlier, so as I said, I'm Jewish, but I think I have a more Buddhist, as well as a Buddhist sensibility. My feeling is that we're all related, and that when there's hunger or there's homelessness out there, it's me. You know, that person is my brother. That person's my sister.
You actually said earlier that when someone else is feeling the pain of hunger,
it's my pain. Yeah. It's my hunger.
And that's I think even more powerful the way you had put it earlier when we were talking.
And it feels that way, but if you can do something, if you have pain or hunger and you can't do anything about it, you accept it. But when you can,
most of us walk by the hungry person. Mm-hmm. Most of us don't even notice when we're walking out of the movie.
Yeah.
You not only noticed, but you put a plan of action into...
Well, I guess I had the freedom to explore things that interested me. Some people, I think, are so busy with their day-to-day obligations. I somehow, because of my family business, was able to take some time off and explore. And then Jim Morton said, "I'll help you." And one morning I'm in bed and I get a call, and a woman says, "Is this Mr. Greenberg?" I said, "Yes." She said, "Well, this is Happy Rockefeller. This was Nelson's first wife." She said, "I spoke to Reverend Morton, and he told me some very good things about you. I'd like to make a donation." So she said, "I'm going to send you a $5,000 check." So that was my first donation.
Wow.
So,
but this is before the Interfaith Assembly is founded.
right, exactly.
What year was it founded?
Well, it was founded officially in around 1985. So it was first an office of the cathedral, then it was the Interfaith Center, Right to Housing Office, and the Interfaith Office, and we were incorporated in 1989. Or 1988. It was a series of progressions until we became our own independent.
And its central mission is,
Our central mission really is to understand how the faith communities can impact on homelessness. So I feel like I'm kind of a scout. I mean, right now, after doing this for 40 years, I'm working with the mayor's office, I'm working with the mayor's faith office, I'm all these advocacy groups. Through our life skills programs that we mentioned, that Dennis has graduated from, I've gotten to know hundreds of homeless people. I have a relationship with many people. I'm a part of this homeless self-help community. So I feel like I'm on a first-name basis, and I understand the realities of being homeless, not that I've experienced it, but working with service providers, working with elected officials, working with advocates, housing providers. So what I try to do, and the faith community, and what I try to do is find one kind of common language. Let's all be in the same room and talk about what we can do together. And the point is, business, corporations are in the business to make money. The faith community is in the business of crying out for justice, I think, of speaking to the morality of the way we live. And in fact, when we started, our first effort of the Interfaith Assembly was, in effect, to bear witness to the crisis. What we did, starting in 1985, was we would go down to City Hall one night a year, and we would say, when the budget was being finalized, is this the best we can do? Is this what God is calling us to do as a city? We'd stay overnight one night a year. When we did it in 1988, as I was mentioning earlier, we started with 400 people in the church, in Trinity Church, marched into the park. Torrential rainstorm, 100 people started the night. We had 12 people in the morning left. But of course I had to be there because I was the one who organized it. And that morning we had arranged to meet with 8 of the best city council members, including Ruth Messenger, who's still around. She was council member then, she became borough president, and others. But of the 12 who were with us, 6 of them were homeless. So we went and met with these council members and said, what should we know about in the budget? Of course, now we know you don't just ask the day before the budget's starting, you have to know through the year. But it was new to me then. And they told us the details of what was going on, but they said, but we're here because we're the members of the council that care about homelessness. The people you need to talk to, the people who didn't come to this meeting. And the folks who were with us who were homeless said, well, we want to talk to the other members of the council. We want to go out into the park, and we want to stay there until the budget's over. We want to stay there I said, that could be 30 days outside. And they said, well, look, some of us already live outside, but we were just told we can make a difference.
Wow.
And the light bulb went off for me, that these folks aren't just people who are looking to be helped. They want to help themselves. They want to be part of the solution. They moved into the park. They ended up being in the park for 200 days, from June 1st to Christmas Day, someone there every day in the park. And it was out of that experience that we developed this program, ultimately to help them to build community and to get back on their feet, to share their story, to work on their goals, and to really kind of have a sense of community. And so we've graduated over 1,500 people.
This is the life skills program.
And I know there are a number of people. In fact, I got a call from someone yesterday. I mentioned to you, I was at a City Hall press conference about a year ago, and I looked at this guy, and I said, you look familiar. And he said, yeah, I'm John England. I did your program 20 years ago. And he took out his phone, and he had a picture of the certificate that I had signed in his phone.
Can you describe the life skills program for us?
Sure.
What does it mean if I'm...
Yeah, so what we do is we will, and there are now, I'm not sure, most of them stopped during COVID. Some of them have been operating online. But basically, a community that wants to mount this program will identify the particular population they want to work with. So we have one for domestic violence survivors. We have one for homeless veterans. We had one for homeless youth. We need to find funding for it. About half of them were LGBT. Half the homeless youth are LGBT. But you find the population you want to work with, then you outreach to that community, and then the program basically goes about 3 months. Generally, we meet, we also have a number of programs for people who've come out of prison. But generally, we meet twice a week. We have dinner. People take turns chairing the meeting. So
sharing their story of
homelessness. So there are 3 types of sessions that we do. One is a session where people tell their story. So we give them an opportunity to develop an outline and eventually share their story with everyone in the group, and eventually in public with this speaker's night. The second is we do a goal-setting workshop, and we match people up with mentors who will help them work on their personal goals, one-on-one. Every other week, work on their personal goals.
Goals such as?
Such as personal goals, financial, legal, health-related, whatever it is that's important to them. We'll give them some like leading questions. They may have an outstanding warrant that they've been avoiding the police for. They may not have been in touch with their children for 20 years. They may want to lose some weight. Maybe their health is bad. Maybe they wanted to get their GED. Or they want to go to school. They want to, whatever it is, we want to help them with it. We want to map it out, help them. What are the steps? And then kind of, as we say, accompany them as they look to achieve them. And then the third is what we call life skills classes, just really conversations that are led by some local leaders on topics important to that group. So if it's domestic violence survivors, it's breaking the cycle of abuse, or being partner with your children in education. We do a session on healthy living. We'll bring in a health professional, or healthy relationships, or developing a support system. So you're really creating this whole support structure that 10 people are participating in over a 3-month period. And ultimately, they always say, this feels like family. And I'll tell you one story.
And it provides ongoing support then, in other words?
Well, then after that, we would encourage them. We will then, in some cases, we will have a follow-up meeting every month. There's another group, this homeless self-help support group, that we will refer them to. And so, and actually the group that we work with, this group of veterans, because veterans come with already a real, connection. These guys, once we met first 3 months, they just continued. They're still meeting. They've been helping each other with jobs, with houses. And it's amazing what they've done, the connections that we help them make. Because the point is, we find people who are ready to make a change. We are very selective. These people have to be ready to virtually attend every meeting, prepared to tell their story, prepared to work with someone on their goals. Their behavior, if they are aggressive, we have to leave the program. We give them a stipend. We provide them, they can get $250 or $300 to complete the program. So we value them. We provide a meal every session. We have a caseworker who works with so it's really a support system, but you're creating community. And often people don't have that.
So I think many people have an impression of what a homeless person is, how they ended up in this. Can you maybe flesh that out for us, or maybe disabuse us of some stereotypes?
Sure. Well, look, I think everybody has, we all have different potentiality to become homeless. Some of us start out with a lot more support, family support, financial support, educational, emotional. Some people are much more vulnerable. Some people are much closer to homelessness than others. But I think for anyone, each of us could create a scenario where we'd become homeless. A lot of things would have to go wrong. But imagine, trauma often triggers homelessness. You're in a car accident with your family, everyone dies but you. What happens? A terrible thing, but this happens to people. These things happen to people. You may have a traumatic brain injury, which I've become more aware of, that many people on the street have traumatic brain injury and they don't get it dealt with. So they're running around, they're wounded. Or they have physical or, again, other trauma. They lose a job, they lose an apartment. Certain things will happen and they will pursue every option until there are no options left. So often people, they lose their apartment, they stay with family or friends, but after a while, after a year or two, they're outlived their welcome. Or they're so embarrassed because they lost their job and they feel it's their fault. They don't want to go to people and tell them. Many of the people we work with, they have children. They don't want to their children don't know where they are. They're so ashamed to tell. Why haven't you spoken to your child? Well, I don't want them to know this happened to me. Don't you think they'd want to know? I guess so. Dennis, who we spoke, right? He connected with his granddaughter in the elevator of one of our programs.
Right. He tells that story to our 7th graders. Dennis is the man who comes to our 7th grade every year and shares his quite captivating and riveting story.
Yeah.
So,
but it's a different story for everyone. But the fact is, no matter what this path there is, there was a trauma involved in becoming homeless, and there's a trauma related that results in being homeless. Because when you're out there,
in other words, you're continued to be traumatized by the homelessness.
By homelessness. And as we were saying earlier, the options for many people, I mean, there are not a lot of good options for people who are homeless. I mean, the shelters are, in many cases, very demoralizing. They can be very dangerous. That's why some people choose the street. And the street, of course, is very dangerous. When you sleep, I mean, people getting their things stolen all the time. They're getting beaten up all the time. So there's no really good option. And frankly, well, let me correct myself. As mentioned to you, one of the projects that I'm working on with Norman Siegel, the civil rights attorney, and Bob Hayes, actually, is we're working with the mayor's office and doing this, what we're calling the Street Homeless Advocacy Project, SHAP. So we're going out every Thursday. The leader of the Midtown team. We go out and we engage folks who are homeless, and we have an outreach worker who will work with us, and we can say to someone, would you like a place to come inside? Now, we're not offering the congregate shelters, because those are dangerous. I mean, those are scary. But there are some single and double rooms available, some, very few, that we can send them to. Many of the people we speak to have already been sent to a place that they didn't want to go to. So it's very hard to convince them again.
So they're scarred by that.
Yeah. But some people, and as I was saying, a few months ago, this young man came and said he was working as a security guard at the New York Public Library for a year and a half, homeless.
Wait, he had a job, yet he was homeless.
So he was homeless. So he probably kept his things in storage. He probably was a member of a gym so he could wash up.
Can you, you have to unpack that a little bit more.
I don't even know how he did it.
But is that common?
One-third of the people, one-third of the adults in the shelter system are working.
But homeless.
But homeless.
Can't afford an apartment in the city.
Exactly. So this guy, we said, well, could we find you a place? He said, yeah. And we sent him to a good place. This wonderful outreach worker, Shakur Cooper, found out there's a place. We sent him to Brooklyn. He came by 2 weeks ago. Said he's doing great.
Wow, that's amazing. Unpack, so what is today the number of homeless in New York City?
So we just looked on the Coalition for the Homeless site. They're estimating about 61,000 people are sheltered by the city.
Right, so that does not include people who are sleeping in the subway.
And they're probably 2,500 to 5,000 people on the street or subways.
Right.
And we know recently the mayor's been talking about addressing the crisis of mentally ill people on the street. How do we determine if they're a danger to themselves or others? The current law is that you can take someone in for observation for up to 36 hours. Then you have to release them if it's determined, I think it's 36 hours, if it's determined that they're not a danger to themselves or others. He is now trying to revise that definition so that if someone is unable to care for themselves, now how do you define that? Does it mean they're not getting 3 full meals a day or they haven't eaten in a day? Then he's suggesting we can take them in against their will. Now the problem is when you try to force someone in, you're re-traumatizing them. And again, just as people who aren't mentally ill have been offered terrible options, these people are on the street because they've been offered terrible options. So if you're going to, and I'm suggesting that they do a pilot project. So you think you can work with 100 individuals and treat them well so that even if you force them in or coerce them in, you're going to give them an opportunity to really get stable? Fine, let's work with 100. Let's work with 50. Let's have some successes and then build from there. Because if you hear nurses, they say, we're overwhelmed already. We can't even deal with the people coming in the door. Are you going to send us more people? So, and let me just say, so talk about what are the solutions. So, obviously a long-term solution is building more affordable housing. And as I said earlier, we've recently had 2 successes where 2 neighborhoods in the 2 housing projects in New York City have been approved by the city council, which means that they're a go. One of them is in the Throgsneck area of the Bronx, where they had built the lowest number of affordable units in the last 8 years. 8 units in 8 years were built, affordable housing. The council member, who was very critical of the plan, but ultimately approved the plan, is for 240 units of affordable housing in that area.
Affordable housing, can you help define that too?
Well, yeah. Affordable housing is basically if you pay no more than 1/3 of your income in rent. So that's what affordable is supposed to be. We also, but again, your question is, what happens? How do we help people bridge the gap? Because people are getting public assistance, not nearly enough to pay for housing. But there's something called a housing voucher, a rent subsidy voucher, which can cover the difference between what the people are getting from public assistance and what the rent is. Now, until last year, and there's a long history of vouchers, but until last year, the voucher level that the city was offering was not enough to pay for apartments. There were only 500 apartments citywide that these 16,000 voucher holders could actually use to buy an apartment.
So it's not nearly enough.
But as a result of the great work of a city council member, Steve Levin, the voucher level went up to the point where there are now 70,000 apartments citywide that you could rent for those vouchers. But the problem is landlords are very resistant to taking the vouchers, and the administration of the vouchers is very cumbersome. So we're trying to get the landlords to be more willing to accept vouchers and getting the city to get its act together. And part of the reason landlords
You mean to cut through make it not so overly bureaucratic?
Exactly, because right now, I met a man who was, when I was doing outreach for this outreach team, who was living in an apartment with a voucher. He said it took me 9 months. I had a voucher for 9 months, had the apartment picked out for 9 months. It took me 9 months to get in there. 9 months. And people tell me that's a short amount of time.
It's a long time.
But if there are 20,000 city FEPS vouchers outstanding, if we can get those to work, that's the holy grail. That's 20,000 households who are now in housing. So that's one element that we're working on. But of course, building the housing is the longer term, objective. But that we got these two approved. They won't be online for 5 years, but that's almost 3,000 units of housing that'll be out there that are not there now.
Yeah, it seems to me that you're much more focused on the long-term solutions. So can you help us, with the long-term view? You've been in this for 40 years.
Yeah.
I mean, it seems to me that more people are talking about homelessness. Mm-hmm. That more people think that it's a crisis now that wasn't a crisis 5 years ago. Can you sort of help us? And are those perceptions accurate? Are those descriptions accurate?
Well, as I was saying, we spoke earlier, when I started this work in 1982, there were about 2,000 to 4,000. The number was going up. Homeless people. No one was talking about it. It was not in the news. So it was not a conversation. I knew it was a concern, but other people, it was not in public conversation. Now, people are talking about it, and they've been talking about it for years. I mean, the city has been addressing it, trying to address it. So I think that's a good thing. I think the fact that we're now talking about what do we do with mentally ill homeless people? Are they a danger to themselves or others? I think that's a good thing, because it's now something we're thinking about, that we want to come up with some solutions for, and some very thoughtful conversations are bubbling up. I think, though, the key, as you and I were saying, is really how do we view the other? Do we see someone who's struggling as worthy of our support, worthy of our concern, worthy of a place to live? And because I believe, as a society, we have the capacity to provide decent housing for people. I mean, it costs us so much. It costs us $60,000, $70,000, $80,000 to keep an individual in a shelter for a year. We have an obligation to do that. It costs us much less to keep someone in housing. It could cost us
the shelter system is more expensive than an apartment.
Absolutely. How about someone in a hospital? There was a story, I think it's called $1 Million Man, someone in Seattle. Cost $1 million in public funds because he kept on going back to the emergency room because he was homeless. If he was housed, it wouldn't have cost us $1 million. So it's a much more cost-effective, to say nothing, a much more humane solution. And then people are stable, and then they can work. I was at a book talk a few years ago in Brooklyn, and I was parking, and I'm parking in front of the synagogue, and like the no parking zone, and the woman guard is, and I said, look, I'm going to, she said, I'll watch your car. Why don't you park over here? I come back and I told her what the book talk was about, and she told me she was homeless. She's homeless. She's living in a shelter. She's working as a guard at the synagogue. Wow. But the fact is, they're working. They want to help themselves. They want to help themselves.
I
Give
don't
them a
think
chance.
I'm not sure that's people's impression.
I know, because they hide it. No one wants to look homeless. They do
No,
their best.
what
right.
I'm suggesting is,
Yeah.
I don't know if it's people's impression that someone is wants to get out of their homelessness.
And they do. I think the key is, do we think it's possible? So as I was saying, we had this vigil in City Hall Park, and when it got cold, we found a place for people to sleep at night so they could come back during the day. There was a bus that would drive right past City Hall Park on its way to a shelter and past that church where they were staying. These men, mostly men, refused to go into that bus because the mindset of the people in that bus going to the shelter was so negative, was so dismal, so hopeless, that they didn't want to be part of that conversation. So people give up on themselves, they give up on the system. I think people also give up on government, because government has, in many cases, not done a very good job. But it's important to put things in perspective. You know, we see the 5,000, 2,500, whatever, mentally ill, however many there are, on the street. Probably maybe 500, are mentally ill, and the rest are just kind of having a hard time. But we are now housing in New York State 40,000 individuals in what's called mental health housing.
You're saying they're inappropriately housed?
No, they're not. No, the 40,000 are well housed. We need to have more money for support services, but these people are living stably. They would be homeless. 40,000 of them that are not homeless because we're providing housing and support services. So yes, maybe we're failing. We haven't yet succeeded in housing these 500. We've succeeded in housing 40,000. We don't see the successes, we see the failures. But let's keep things in perspective. We're doing a lot good. One failure is a failure.
You think we're doing a better job today than we've been?
I think we are. I think we've learned how to do it well. But sadly, because the need is still so great, that there are some providers who are not doing a good job. Now maybe they're being asked to do too much. Maybe they're just not. Maybe they're cutting corners. I mean, for example, I work with a group called CUCS, Center for Urban Community Services. From my perspective, there's no one better. And when we talk about creating a community facility, the city will often try to create a facility, and they'll try to get as many, once they get a site, they want to get as many people into that site because they need to find housing. So the city will say to someone, could you provide beds for 200 people or 140 people? This guy, I had heard they wouldn't accept over 100. He said, no, Mark, the number is 90. We won't accept a facility over 90 because we found that over 90, my staff doesn't know everyone's name.
Wow.
So for him, it's a community, and the people matter. Most places will take that 140 bed because it's a bigger paycheck. They think we can do a good job, but the fact is, when you're in a place with 140 people, you're not known. You can get lost. The people don't know you. He found 90 can be a community. These people get better. Other people are just kind of passing through. The focus has got to be on the individual.
It's interesting, when Dennis comes and speaks to our students, one of the things that it makes an impression on me every year, that the hardest part in some ways was not being hungry, but people walking past him and looking past him, and not seeing his humanity in a sense.
Exactly.
Losing his name, as you're saying.
Absolutely. These people have, what they've been through, it's like they've been through a personal war, and they've survived. They've survived unbelievable things. And let's give them some credit and support them to get back on their feet. They want to give back. But they can't if you keep them on their knees, you keep them dependent, you keep them in a place that's, that just isn't set up to help them be fully human beings.
I don't know how one of the things I admire about you is, I don't know how you look at that number 60,000 and still can be so hopeful. Can you explain that to me? Because I want a little piece of that, if you will.
The Jewish adage, and I guess it comes from different places, but you save one soul and you've saved the world. Well, this guy who's working at the public library, we've saved his soul. We've saved his world. And he's going to save other people. And so for me, it's really a blessing for me to be able to work with the individuals and also work with the system. Because if you're doing one or the other, if you're working just with individuals, say, yeah, I've helped 10 people, but look at all the thousands of people. If you work with the system, you say, but what's the point? It's only numbers. So for me, it's a real blessing, and I'd suggest anybody who wants to do this, find a way to do both. Find a way to be individually connected and also use that experience to try to affect the system. So I see the results. I mean, I've known people for years who've been homeless and now they're doing great, like Dennis and others. They're incredibly inspiring people. And I see that the city is getting better at doing these things. And again, we've got 4 decades of some ineffective systems, a culture of can't do. And I think this new mayor, he's a bit of a showman, but I think, and as I said earlier, he's kind of a disruptor. He's trying to disrupt his own system, but he's brought in some great people. I've connected with some really top people, really great people in his administration, really top-class people. I'm so impressed with them, and I know they're trying very hard. And as I said earlier, they could have easily not taken this job. This is a tough job.
The job in particular you're talking about is what?
I'm talking in particularly one woman, the deputy mayor for Health and Human Services, Ann Williams Issam, wonderful woman, and his new housing czar, Jessica Katz, incredibly smart person. Gary, I forget his name, who's the head of Department of Services. Gary Jenkins, very committed, had been homeless at some point in his life. Now he's heading the agency, helping people. These people really want to make a difference. And so someone will say to them, look at the problems that city has. They didn't cause the problems. They just stepped into the problems and they're trying to solve them. And it's going to take a long time, but we're making progress. And the mayor has said, you're concerned about homelessness? Well, we want to build a program on your block. If you're really concerned, let's do it. And he's getting these programs approved. He's really encouraging the city council members. And in fact, the last one, the one that was approved in Queens, it was being held up because the council member wanted more affordable units that the mayor was asking for. She was holding out. She got more affordable units. She got family-size units. So the tide is turning. And also on vouchers, for example, I've said how hard it is to get people into housing with vouchers. They're now creating a pilot project where there are 80 apartments that are being held by the Volunteers of America. They're planning to move 80 people from the street to do an intake, and then if they qualify, get them right into housing with a voucher waiting for them. So they're trying some things that we haven't done before. If they're successful, we can build on them. I'm very encouraged.
You seem to have a tremendous faith in government.
I have faith in good government. I mean, when I meet someone and I feel that they're for real, I have faith in them. I work with Gail Brewer, who used to be borough president. Now when she's term limited out of borough president, she got her old job back as city council member. That's the person I have faith in because she's doing it because she cares. Liz Kruger, who's a state senator, Linda Rosenthal, there are a number, and I can name them. There are some people I know that really give a damn, and they're so committed and they're so smart. And those are people I believe in, and I think the people I met in the new Adams administration, I think they really care.
So reflect, we were talking earlier about the contrast between the city and Long Island.
Yeah.
That in some ways the size of the city,
right,
and its built-in structures is easier, if you will, to address this problem.
I think so. I was talking to a friend of mine who used to work with the Interfaith Nutrition Network and asking about what
which is in Hempstead and Long Island.
Right, and what advocacy is. Obviously, faith communities can provide shelter. We can provide food. But if we're looking at the larger systemic questions, we have to go get government to change. And it's much easier to advocate for change when you've got a structure like the city, where here you've got towns, you've got townships, you've got villages, you have counties. Everyone's got a different set of rules, and it's really hard to take hold and say, we're going to do this here. And I was thinking that the best way, so let me just say there are two pieces of legislation at the state level that could make a difference. One of them is to try to establish a statewide voucher. That would mean that you don't have to be homeless, but if you're at risk of homelessness, if you're housing insecure,
right,
you can get that little bit to make up the difference. Or if you're homeless, you can get and the proposal is very modest. It's $200 million, which would provide vouchers for about 10,000 people a year. But that's 10,000 people who are not homeless. That's something that could happen at the state level. That would affect Nassau County. The other thing, which apparently is a proposal that the governor may make, is this thing called the accessory housing unit. So we have zoning rules all around the country where you can only have a certain one household on your half acre or your 1 acre or your 2 acre lot. Now, if we were able to have some flexibility on that, I looked up the number, from the Regional Plan Association. Within 20 years, we could create 92,000 affordable housing units in Nassau County in 20 years. If people were willing to say, okay, I'm going to create another opportunity to live on my property, it'll be, I mean, obviously, I provide housing for people I respect, I feel safe, but that alone would give us the opportunity to create almost 100,000 more affordable units. That's families, that's households. But how do people feel about that? How do people feel about having someone else in their neighbor's 1 acre lot? That's not what we do here. We have ours. We don't want those people here. So that's why I say the real key is...
I think that would be a very difficult hurdle to
very difficult,
overcome.
Of course. But I think you break through that when people start to get to know individuals and their stories and say that person deserves a place to live. Look at how hard they're a nurse, they're home health aide, they're taking care of my mother and they can't afford a place to live. They're living in a shelter, they're taking care of my grandmother.
I do think with all of these problems we tend to caricature the individuals who are involved, right, and create this sort of stereotype in our mind as opposed to meeting people face to face. Do you think we do a better job addressing the problem and the crisis of homelessness than hunger? There seems to be more programs in terms of providing meals.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and the thing to remember with regard to hunger, and my friend Joel Berg, who runs the Hunger Free America and Hunger Free NYC, terrific guy, he reminds us that all the emergency food programs that exist will provide between 5 and 10% maximum of the emergency, provide for between 5 and 10% of the emergency food needs. 90 to 95% comes from federal, WIC or SNAP or whatever.
Right.
So these are crucial because particularly some people who are undocumented, they don't qualify for these government grants. But most of the hunger relief that is happening is through government programs. But we do a better job, I think, of making sure, when we had COVID, during the COVID crisis in New York City, we were providing millions and millions of meals. No one, but people were getting fed. Massive numbers of people getting fed. Homelessness is more complicated, obviously. It's, a house is harder to create than a meal.
Right.
Sadly, we obviously waste a lot of food, and people can relate to that. Someone's hungry, let me feed them, but not someone who's homeless, let me house them next door to me.
Yeah, housing is a much more long-term project. Someone could be hungry just this week or this meal. You can provide one meal. Yeah. And I think that seems, it's almost from a giver's perspective, it's easier to tackle.
It's easier, but I think the point is that providing people some emergency food is a way of making that connection. And so if we can sit down and eat with people rather than just give them a bag and say, enjoy, then we get to know them. It's really those personal relationships that build a better society, I think. It's breaking down, as my friend Bernie Glassman, who's a Buddhist, what do you call it, Jubu,
yes,
whatever, wonderful man who founded the Zen community in New York and also this group called the Zen Peacemaker Order. Great man, his job before that, he was working with McDonnell Douglas. He was the head of a project that was fail-safing interplanetary travel. That was his, this amazing mind, wonderful man. And he said, Mark, he said, the key is to reduce the distance between yourself and those who suffer. To reduce the distance. That's what we need to do.
There is fear, let's unpack that. There is fear involved when you see someone who's homeless.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I'm walking on the street with my kids.
Yeah.
So why would I traverse that distance?
Well, I think you have to be careful because you don't know what that state of mind that person's in. You don't know how they're going to relate to you. I just find I open up and I look at them, and then I look at them, and if they don't want to, some people say, leave me alone. There are people we reach in front of the church when we do our outreach. This guy doesn't want to take my water. He won't take a bottle, so I know not to bother him. When I recognize who it is, I just pass him by. But some people, you connect. What's the potential of connecting? Hi, how are you doing? Okay. Or if there's an openness, then you can build on that. What's going on? Are you okay? Are you cold? You need, and then they may tell you. And if they tell you, then you can listen. I was walking down the street last year, I think.
Listening doesn't solve
But it starts a relationship, and it also helps them feel listened to. It helps them feel heard and acknowledged, which is often, as Dennis was saying, that's the crucial thing. They're treated as invisible or worse. And when you listen to them and you find out what's going on, I was walking down the street, I saw this person with this long blonde hair. I thought it was a woman. I said, "You okay?" Picked up his head. It was a man with long hair. He said, "Oh, well, some guys came and beat me up last night. They took all my stuff." I said, "Really?" And so then there's a conversation there. "Well, can I help? Do you know where to get your ID back?" At least someone listened to him. I gave him a few dollars or whatever it was. It's making that connection. If you get into the habit of doing that, let me say, I have been communicating with homeless people, for 40 years. I have never been attacked. I've never been threatened. I've spoken to people who are very angry, but I listened to them. They weren't angry at me. They were just very angry, and I listened to their anger, and that was what they needed. I never felt unsafe. It's amazing because I treated them with respect.
That might have more to do with your character than
everybody has their own comfort level, but I'm just saying that these folks aren't out there to hurt you. They're just hurt. They're wounded themselves. They're going through horrible situation. And if just say, "Are you okay?" and they'll say, "Leave me alone," you leave them alone. They'll tell you. But if they say, "Oh yeah, can you get me a sandwich?" Say, "What's going on? Are you getting public assistance?" "Yeah, I'm waiting for this." Or you just ask some questions. Often it opens a whole world up. There's one woman who worked with us who was raped and she was going through a horrible situation, and she said she was embarrassed to tell her mother what had happened to her. She was sitting out in front of a church every Sunday, and she'd be asking for money, and there was a couple. She would tell the story. There was people who would give her money, and then someone said, "You're not really a bad person. You need to get some help." They'd say that to her. Finally, they convinced her. She contacted her mother. She came. It took a while for her to get over her own sense of shame and her sense of not being worthy of getting help. Mm-hmm. People feel like they failed. And you need to, as we said earlier, you need to give them some love until they can remember that they're worthy of love. It's very basic.
And that, you really feel strongly that that's the first step?
Just opening up, just listening. Just listen, just opening yourself up and saying, "How are you? Are you okay?"
Is that the advice you would give to people who want to try to help and do something?
I think so. I think as we say, it's hard to find homeless people in this area. We don't know where they are. They're probably going someplace where they think they can get help. But if you're working in a food program, just say, "How are you doing?" But not just kind of a throwaway, but ask, "How are you doing?"
And really listen.
Listen. "I'm okay. How are you doing?" And you can tell them, "I'm doing. I had whatever." Just establish that. Be more comfortable relating to people who are at a very different level in terms of security than we are. I think we have to do that. It's hard to do it on Long Island. On Long Island, I grew up in Plainview, very insulated.
Yeah, I think that's the challenge of not just Long Island but the suburbs.
Yeah,
is
right.
That we, it's almost intentionally insulating. That
right.
you just get in your car and you go to your different locations,
yeah.
And you don't even walk past people,
right?
And so I think that is the city. You really do have to confront what is before you and what. But
I'll tell you, it creates a much richer environment. A richer life because
in terms of living in a city.
I'm saying in terms of personally.
You're speaking in Long Island though.
Right, anywhere, yeah, anywhere. I think anywhere. When you start to open up your consciousness to the fact that some people's lives are very different than ours. For some people, having a bed and a door to lock is not a given. And for us it is. You feel so blessed. Maybe I need a new car or maybe I'd like a new couch, but damn, look what I have. I've got 95% of what I need, and I'm so blessed. And some people don't have it. And I think it changes the way you view your own situation when you realize that other people's situation is very different.
And that I can share.
And I can share, right? And I'm so blessed, right? Because I can share because I have so much. I have the level of security to share. I mean, that's why the folks that in New York, in Manhattan, there are people who are very well off and people who are homeless, but we do this mentor matching, and the people really get to talk to each other. It's really incredibly rich. I mean, there's a woman that I think I mentioned, a book that one of our mentors, who's a professor at Fordham, English professor at Fordham, took a year off and wrote a book compiling, it's called Sacred Shelter, right? 13 Journeys of Homelessness and Healing. And Dennis is one of the stories in there.
Yes, he's very proud of being featured in the book.
Yeah, yeah. And she talked about how she became a mentor because she wanted to help someone else. And then when she connected with Rodney, she realized he helped her so much more than she think. I mean, they helped each other. She was depressed, but he helped her realize how fortunate she was and gave her a sense of purpose. It's an incredible
It's an interesting
gift.
lesson that helping others and opening our hearts to others can actually lift us
Tremendously.
and it's not just for the person that's being helped.
And she says he helped me much more than I helped him. I think they both helped each other. I think it's key that we have to we're valuable and they're valuable. They're not more valuable, less valuable. We're all human beings. We can all help each other. We need each other. We need them to help us, gain perspective. They need us to help them gain perspective. Together we make a much richer world.
I think also what you said, that it's a right to have a house.
Yeah.
And to have shelter.
It should be. It should be. It's a human right. It should be a legal right. And we can afford it. It's not like we can't, because we're spending so much more keeping people in vulnerable situations. We can afford as a society. Richie Torres, who's a great congressman, been promoting for years. I was at in fact, that press conference I mentioned with John England, who maybe is watching because he called me yesterday, and I gave him the link. He's been promoting this universal voucher. Basically, in every county in the country, there are people who are rent stretched. Right? So in every county of the country, if we provided some money from the federal government to help people make that difference, people would be housed. They wouldn't be as vulnerable. They'd have more money, more stability to help buy goods. I mean, it would be good for everyone. It's not good for anyone to have people who are homeless. It doesn't work for anybody. It's not good for our economy.
But you're also introducing another piece. It's not just homelessness. We're also talking about housing insecure.
Exactly. Because the people who come to these food programs, it's because they don't have enough money for food and for rent. They're paying all their money in rent. They have nothing for food. So we give people a little more stability.
We can just fill in that gap, and we can make a huge difference.
I mean, yeah, it could not much, and give people stability, and then they can give back. They want to give back. People, we all need to feel of value. I think some people are always going to take advantage of the system. That's a minor segment. I think most people give them a chance. They want to give back. They want to live full lives.
It's interesting. You feel that it's a small number who take advantage of the system.
I think it's human nature, but I think when people have enough, then they'll try to find fulfillment in doing good.
Right, because I think that small number who do maybe take advantage of food stamps or housing vouchers, that gets blown up larger.
But we have those people among the very wealthy too, who take and don't give anything because they're smart. Because they don't pay taxes because they're smart. They think it's smart. People who say, look, I got a great deal, I'm getting housing, but that's a minority, I think. And we can encourage people to say, your life is going to be richer if you give back. But even if some people take advantage, it doesn't do anyone any good to have them in a shelter. It's costing so much more to keep them dependent.
I think that is a fascinating point, that the large public housing, these projects are more expensive option, and we could be doing this in a much more helpful and financially prudent way.
And generous. We can afford to be generous because we're actually saving money by being generous.
So give us what's your closing advice and thought on this? So this is something that we're talking about, we're seeing. So two things. What should I do personally when I see a homeless person? If you can give me some advice about that. And what should we be advocating for?
So let me say that I think I mentioned before in our earlier talk a few years ago, I love the quote from Pasteur, which is various ways of saying it, but fortune favors the prepared mind. So I think it's important to be aware of what the options are so you can take advantage when the opportunity presents itself. So I think first, just to be aware of all the things that are moving and you know, the opportunities to make a change. So I think that's important, and anyone who's interested, they can certainly, I mean, I can add you to my mailing list, and you can receive my periodic newsletters every week or so, and maybe you can reach, you know, through the rabbi. So I think that's important, to be aware and see where the opportunities are. So for example, now with vouchers, if we can get vouchers to work, that's 20,000 households that can get housing, and the 20,000 apartments that can be rented, you know, and stabilize communities. So I think that's one thing. And let me just say that there's you know, as we know through COVID, that the whole supply chain concept, there's a whole system, a series of steps that have to be taken for people to be housed. There's something we call the continuum of care, which looks at the individual and what they need from, you know, the street to home. But there's also that supply chain of how do we help people from the street into emergency shelter, into supportive housing, you know, with vouchers, into building permanent housing. So we have to look at the whole continuum. So that's the systemic answer. I think the personal answer is, as I said, my friend Bernie, to try to reduce the distance in a way that's comfortable. If you really want to make a difference, and it will enrich your life, I think, is find a way to get a little closer to the people who are struggling and learn about their story and see if you're an employer, see if maybe there's a job. You know, if there's maybe there's some way you can help. Maybe you can give them advice. Maybe you can, you know, connect them with a resource that they need, or ask on their behalf. Sometimes these things are happening, and they just need someone to advocate for them. Why is this thing happening? Well, I don't know. So you call the elected officials, say, why is this person not getting the help they need? You know, and sometimes standing in for somebody makes all the difference in the world. When you have someone standing up for you, wow, I guess that person really matters. I mean, an example, we had one guy in one of our programs, very hardworking guy, living in what's called a three-quarter house. It was a little room. He kept it very neatly. Then the person who was running the house liked that room. He wanted to move this guy out of that room into a basement or something and move someone else. He didn't know this person had friends, so all of a sudden we started calling the owner, and the guy stayed where he was because someone else advocated for him. Right. He wasn't alone. He couldn't be pushed around. So sometimes just someone advocating for you that can help someone, you know, when you say, what's going on? I'm having this difficult. So I think it's try to establish connections, you know, be comfortable going to a soup kitchen or a food program and open yourself up. And I think things will flow from that. I think it enriches our lives.
That's beautifully said. And I would just add, in terms of, you know, the Jewish tradition, you know, we can't say that the problems in the world are insurmountable, that they're too big to fix. We have to start somewhere. And I very much like and want to echo what you said. You know, you start with the one individual, and you can begin to make a difference. We at the synagogue on January 8th are going to be packing meals with Rise Against Hunger, and we're going to be packing 10,000 meals.
Wow.
Is our plan to, so we're looking forward to partnering with that organization as well and working more with you. So thank you again, Marc Greenberg, for joining us. Your story is inspirational and your work is really wonderful. So thank you again.
Thank you very much. Thanks for inviting me. Thank you all. Good to meet you. Okay.
Marc.
Okay.
Great.
It was fun.